Hello my friends and welcome back to Queenie of London. Thank you so much for popping back to the channel. I really hope you're all doing really well, and it's absolutely lovely to see you all. Today I thought it was only right and proper that we begin this video outside Buckingham Palace. We're going to be heading into the King's Gallery. King's Gallery is part of Buckingham Palace. It's actually next to the Royal Mews where they keep the golden state coach. We're heading inside this incredibly special gallery for an incredibly special exhibition. Today, friends, I give you Queenie and the Queen. Whilst we're taking the short stroll to the King's Gallery, let me tell you a bit about the Royal Collection, of which the wardrobe of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II forms a part, and about this special gallery itself. The Royal Collection is one of the largest and most significant collections of art in the world, and one of the last great Royal European collections to remain intact. With over 1 million pieces belonging to British monarchs over the last 500 years, it includes valuable and rare paintings, sculptures, furniture, jewellery and books, many of which are still used by the royal family today. The whole collection is owned by King Charles III and held in trust for the nation. It's held across 13 royal residences and cared for by the charity, the Royal Collection Trust. The King's Gallery occupies a space that was once home to one of Buckingham Palace's 3 conservatories. Designed by John Nash for George III and Queen Charlotte and completed in 1831, the neoclassical pavilion was converted into a private chapel for Queen Victoria in 1843. On September 13, 1940, during the Blitz, a German bomb hit Buckingham Palace and destroyed the chapel and severely damaged the inner quadrangle, whilst both George VI and Queen Elizabeth were in residence. It was apparently Queen Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip, who in 1962 suggested that the site be redeveloped to house a gallery for the artefacts of the royal collection. The Ministry of Works designed and converted the ruined private chapel and much of the interior, overseen by architect Eric Bedford, and they incorporated elements of the original conservatory designed by John Nash. It was the first part of Buckingham Palace to ever be accessible to the public, and on opening day people queued all along Buckingham Palace Road to be welcomed in to see precious treasures belonging to the Crown in what was then called the Queen's Gallery. In 1999, the space closed for redevelopment in what was to be the largest expansion of Buckingham Palace in 150 years. It reopened in 2002 to mark the Queen's Golden Jubilee. This is the gallery we see today, renamed in 2024 on the accession of King Charles III. 2026 would have marked Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday. In her centenary year, a very special exhibition has come to the King's Gallery, Queen Elizabeth, Her Life in Style. Today, I'll be your guide through the largest and most comprehensive exhibition of Her late Majesty's fashion ever to be mounted. We'll see more than 300 pieces from the Queen's wardrobe, many of which have never before been on display. This exemplary showcase presents the clothing of a royal baby, the occasion wear and play clothes of a little princess, the uniforms of a woman who served in wartime, the couture of a fashionable heir to the throne, a wondrous wedding dress, and a gown as majestic as Majesty itself. We'll see the suits of every shade of a working monarch, terrific tweeds, bespoke millinery, the clothes of duty and of diplomacy, and breathtaking ball gowns. This is the story of Queen Elizabeth's life of style, and it is also, therefore, the story of British fashion. Queen Elizabeth learnt the practice of holding on to special items of clothing and recording for posterity from her mother and grandmother. The Queen added many items that were special to her into the royal collection, often with notes in her own hand. So it is in no small part because of the Queen that we are able to marvel at so much of her wardrobe today. As you know, Queenie of London is also about recording for posterity. This is an historic exhibition, and this video aims to capture it as fully as possible, for you in the present, but also for the viewer of the future who would have loved to have visited. We've a royal treasure trove to open today, so let's step on in. I hope you enjoy. Both these dresses, said Norman Hartnell, the Queen's most prolific couturier, are destined to inhabit some solemn museum. It is strange how a few yards of satin can enjoy an artificial life of some hundreds of years. Sir Hartnell was speaking about the wedding dress and coronation gown he made for Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. But it isn't only those monumental pieces of fashion, royal and national history that we'll see today in this not-so-sombre gallery. We'll walk through a career of royal dressing that spans 40 years, from the 1930s to the 1970s. Having been kept by the Queen for posterity and thus forming the largest extant collection of his work, we'll see many of the exceptionally crafted creations of Hartnell, some of the Queen's most memorable ensembles dreamed up and made by him and his team right here in London. It's only right then that one of his gowns greets us in the exhibition's first room. If an exhibition was a book, this room and the dress within would be the preface. This Hartnell gown from 1953 embodies the very essence of this exhibition as I see it, a demonstration of the exquisite craft behind the ensembles worn by the Queen throughout her reign. Within the gold threads of this dress, behind the re-embroidered lace, is a story of British haute couture and British design that will be told through the galleries which lie ahead. As well as Norman Hartnell, Hardy Amis, Ian Thomas, Angela Kelly, Stuart Parvin, all dressmakers by appointment of the Queen, and their creations showcased up ahead. Her Majesty did not only choose her own clothes, but as archival records show, was closely involved with their design and manufacture. This intimacy demonstrates her, quote, elegant, timeless, restrained, and sometimes quirky style was entirely her own. Through the decades, the Queen well and truly flew the flag in support of the three beautiful words, made in Britain, promoting the British fashion industry at home and on the global stage. Princess Elizabeth of York happened to have been born at the same time as London was opening the doors of its first couture houses and as the landscape of British fashion was changing. Let's step on through to the exhibition's first room and learn how Elizabeth Alexandra Rose was dressed as a baby with these changing times in mind. On the 29th of May 1926, when she was just 1 month old, Princess Elizabeth was christened in the private chapel of Buckingham Palace. She wore this very christening gown made of cream Spitalfield silk overlaid with fine Honiton lace and a design incorporating national emblems. But Elizabeth was not the first royal baby to wear this incredible christening gown, nor would she be the last. It was crafted in 1842 by Janet Sutherland, Queen Victoria's dressmaker, at the request of the Queen for the christening of the future King Edward VII, and was inspired by the Spitalfield silk and Honiton lace of Victoria's own wedding dress. In 1894, Queen Victoria gave the robe to the Duchess of York, the later Queen Mary, who began keeping record on note cards of all the royal babies dressed in the gown for their christenings. On display, we can see Queen Elizabeth's continuation of this tradition of recording for posterity in her handwritten list. In 2002, she herself recognised the need to preserve the gown, which had become increasingly fragile, and so requested a replica be made for all future royal christenings. The gown is an incredible treasure, and it's wonderful to imagine how it was taken out of a precious casket each time a new bundle of royal joy, stretching back over 130 years, needed to wear it. From the moment Princess Elizabeth was born, the nation was fascinated by her clothing, and many of the pieces worn to historic occasions and in official photographs were lovingly kept for posterity. On display in this cabinet are some of the earliest pieces belonging to baby Elizabeth. One of the main suppliers of her baby clothes, layette and knitwear, were children's outfitters Smith & Co. of 193 Sloane Street, Chelsea. They provided simple dresses but also bespoke pieces for special occasions. On display is a Smith & Co. dress worn in the adorable official photograph marking Elizabeth's first birthday. The cotton lawn dress has tiers of pleated fabric in the lower part of the skirt, and the waist was originally threaded with a white silk ribbon. Baby clothes were also purchased from Woolen Brothers and from Harrods, both of Knightsbridge. The baby shoes on display are one of only 3 pairs to survive in the royal collection, the other 2 being a pair of ballet slippers and, appropriately, some riding boots. The darling bonnets at the front of the display case here are made of 19th century Honiton and Valenciennes lace and were remade in the 1920s for Princess Elizabeth. Touchingly, the note on display, written by the Queen herself, details that the bonnets were worn by her and her sister and should be kept, handed over to the royal collection in 1962. This fur coat by Smith & Co. was worn by Princess Elizabeth when she was a bridesmaid at the wedding of her cousin, Lady May Cambridge, to Captain Henry Abel Smith in October 1931. This was Elizabeth's first official public appearance, and press and the public lined the streets to witness such an occasion. The cape is white rabbit fur with a wide stand-up collar, and it's lined with cream silk and has 2 pom-poms for buttons. Underneath, Elizabeth's bridesmaid's dress was a soft powder blue and white, but sadly does not survive in the collection. You might have caught a glimpse at the bottom of the skirt in the incredible photo from the little princess's arrival at the church in Sussex with her mother. Also on display is another of Princess Elizabeth's coats made with fur. This is a cream and brown astrakhan tailored coat from 1938. The young princess also had a coat in her wardrobe by furrier J. Stamler of New York, which was presented to her parents as a gift during a state visit to America and Canada in 1939. The 2 bridesmaid dresses in this cabinet are significant in that they are the first pieces of British couture worn by Princess Elizabeth, and they were both made for significant royal weddings of the 1930s. In 1934, the 4th son of King George V and Queen Mary, George Duke of Kent, married Princess Marina of Greece. Princess Marina was an incredibly fashionable woman. In fact, Marion Crawford, governess to Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, revealed that both girls were fascinated by their Aunt Marina's clothes, and in particular admired her hats. Marina chose Edward Molyneux to design and make her wedding dress and trousseau, as well as the dresses for her 8 bridesmaids. Molyneux, born in Hampstead, London in 1891, had opened a Paris salon in April 1919 after having worked as an assistant designer to Lucille, and in March 1932, as one of the world's finest couturiers, he opened his first London house at 48 Grosvenor Street. His business was so exclusive it was known as the Mansion rather than as a shop, and had no nameplate above the door. Marina was an avid customer of Molyneux's, who had created the Molyneux woman, a figure of supreme international elegance. Edward Molyneux had also designed the wedding dress of Princess Mary, the daughter of King George V and Queen Mary, in 1922. On the 29th of November 1934, Princess Elizabeth, the youngest of Marina's bridesmaids, wore this dress of mottled silver lame, quote, overlaid with silk tulle and gathered in a frill around the neck, with layers of tulle forming the short frilled sleeves. The waist was fastened by a silver lame belt ornamented with cream silk flowers with a circlet of the same flowers worn as a headdress. But now let's turn to the second bridesmaid dress in this cabinet, worn by the 9-year-old Princess Elizabeth to the wedding of Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, third son of King George V and Queen Mary, and Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott. The dress has a round neck with a frill of pale pink tulle that is repeated on the sleeves and the skirt. The sleeves also feature pearlized flowers in pink and bronze, and also bronze lame leaves. The same decoration that appears on the sleeves can be found on the circlet headdress, along with diamantes and pearls. Lady Alice had chosen Norman Hartnell to design her wedding dress, in so doing offering the British couturier his first royal commission. This bridesmaid dress of Hartnell is the first ever piece designed by him for the young princess, marking the start of almost 4 decades of dressing Elizabeth. These beautiful, shimmering golden dresses of the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret are by the Paris couturier Jean Lanvin, of whom their mother, Queen Elizabeth, was a devoted client. They are made of gold lame and have stand-up collars. At the shoulders, the fabric is stitched and stiffened to create the angular sleeves. At the waist are belts featuring padded laurel leaves, which match the accompanying headbands. On Princess Elizabeth's dress, you can see another strip of lame has been added at the hem, lengthening it so it could be worn as she was growing up, and it shows signs of wear, so it was obviously a favourite of hers. Lanvin had sent the princesses a pair of poupée Reynal dolls, complete with a wardrobe of miniature Lanvin couture, which matched the princesses' own dresses and accessories. The dolls' clothes came in miniature Lanvin boxes, displaying her famous logo, a mother and her child, inspired by Lanvin's muse, her own daughter Marguerite. Princess Elizabeth's favourite doll was Pamela, and Smith & Co. were asked by Elizabeth's parents to make Pamela outfits, most likely modelled on the princess's own clothes. They made a beautiful rabbit fur-trimmed red woolen coat, inspired by one, quote, Lilibet was particularly attached to. This shows how a toy was becoming a fashion doll, 3 decades before Barbie. On the 12th of May 1937 at Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth and Margaret's mother and father became King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, making the young Princess Elizabeth the heir presumptive. This was to be the first time a coronation procession had been televised, and after the turbulence of the abdication of Edward VIII, it was imperative that the new royal family represent stability. The official coronation photographs were taken by Dorothy Wilding, who 15 years later would take the official accession portraits of Queen Elizabeth II. The final dress for us to have a look at in this room is the gown Princess Elizabeth wore to the coronation. Smith & Co. made both dresses for the young princesses. They are of fine silk and Chantilly cotton in the required colours of cream, white and gold. The robe of silk velvet with the ermine trim was made by robe makers Eden Ravenscroft, and the miniature silver coronet was commissioned by the king and made by the court jeweller Garrard & Co. Also on display is the invoice from Smith & Co. This was the first long ceremonial dress Elizabeth had ever worn, and as she wore it at the moment she became heir presumptive to the throne, it is also the most historically significant. What a treat to see it live beyond the photographs of 1937. Moving just along from the first room, we're treated to some more clothing from the little princess's wardrobe. Queen Elizabeth was fond of dressing her two daughters in identical clothes. Twin dressing had been a long tradition and was particularly fashionable in the 19th century. Unsurprisingly, the main survivors from childhood in the royal collection are dresses from formal occasions, but even princesses needed simple everyday pieces they could run around and play in. Their everyday wardrobe consisted of, quote, simple matching woolen hand-knit jerseys, plaid or tweed skirts, and tweed jackets and coats with velvet collars and buttons, as well as cotton blouses and kilts worn with knee-high socks and brown leather lace-up shoes, all British made. In the warmer months, they wore simple, fine cotton lawn dresses with bloomers, such as these examples on display. Their frocks were often made with Liberty's Tana lawn fabric with scattered floral prints, which were often bought from Smith & Co. Princess Elizabeth can be seen wearing a similar dress in this charming photograph with her corgi, Dookie, taken at Royal Lodge, Windsor in 1936. The princesses Elizabeth and Margaret loved dressing up and attended many fancy dress parties. During the Second World War, they also hosted pantomimes at Christmas to raise funds for the Household War Fund to support soldiers at the front. Costumes from these productions, including Aladdin and Old Mother Red Riding Boots, survive in the royal collection. The small fairy costume on display dates from 1930, and an invoice from Smith & Co. details that as well as the wings, the gold dress also came with a wand, which has since been lost. This dress was passed down to Princess Margaret Rose, who wore it in 1934 to a fancy dress party hosted by Lady Astor. You can see both sisters at the party in the photograph on the object card here. Elizabeth is wearing a Tudor-style dress, and this is also on display for us to see. Both these dresses are very finely made of pink silk taffeta and damask and have silver thread trimming. The larger one, older than the smaller version, has a stand-up collar and is incredibly similar to a dress worn by Elizabeth's mother in 1909 at a party at Glamour Castle. It's possible that this was her dress. Just a little while ago, we saw the first ever dress that Norman Hartnell designed for a 9-year-old Princess Elizabeth of York. Before we go through to look at the wardrobe of a fashion-forward young princess, let's step outside the gallery for a moment and head to a part of London that's very important in the story of British fashion and in the story of the monarchy. Just off Berkeley Square, Mayfair, and a few minutes from Regent Street, is Bruton Street. You would have found yourself walking along past the elegant Georgian townhouses of London high society if you took a stroll down Bruton Street in the 1920s. You would also have seen the 5-storey mansion of the Earl and Countess of Strathmore, who were the parents of Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. If you happen to have been walking by on April the 26th, 1923, you might have even caught a glimpse of Lady Elizabeth emerging from her home on the way to her wedding to Prince Albert of York, the future George VI. In no small part because of the street's affluent and well-connected residents, a 22-year-old Norman Hartnell opened his first couture house on the upper floors of number 10 later in 1923. Hartnell had grown up in his parents' pub in Streatham, which, in a brilliant feat of foreshadowing, happened to be called the Crown and Sceptre. Little did the boy who loved his colouring crayons know that he would later become dressmaker by appointment of the Queen and design a dress to be worn with an actual crown and sceptre during the most majestic of royal occasions. The fashion landscape of England at the time meant that Hartnell competed with Mayfair's court dressmakers. This small coterie provided, quote, etiquette-correct dress for the elite British social life that revolved around the monarchy in what was known as the season. As Paris still dominated fashion, these court dressmakers adapted the designs of haute couture for the social lives of their British clientele. Names in the business included Lady Duff Gordon, aka Lucille, Charles Creed, Edward Molyneux, Madame Henley Seymour, Redfern and Sons, and Reville and Rossiter. As a first-generation London couturier, Hartnell designed court dress but, quote, also distinguished himself by asserting his own fashion creativity. Although he later stated that he felt he suffered, quote, from the unforgivable disadvantage of being English in England, he had already achieved great success before his first royal commission. He was already selling his clothes in New York and had shown collections in Paris. Whilst Hartnell was growing his business and reputation, a very notable occurrence took place within the mansion of the Duke and Duchess of York. On April the 21st, 1926, they welcomed into the world a daughter, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth of York. In 1935, Hartnell moved into larger premises. He didn't move far, only to number 26, opposite the Strathmore mansion, although by this time the family of York were living at 145 Piccadilly. Hartnell's autobiography, Silver and Gold, describes in wondrous detail how he designed and decorated the 18th century townhouse, modelling it on the Paris couture houses which his clientele would regularly frequent. A transformed vision, it included a glass and mirror-lined showroom, studios, and a workroom in Bruton Mews, now Bruton Place. It was here at number 26 that Hartnell received and worked on his first royal commission, the wedding and bridesmaid dresses for the nuptials of Lady Montague Douglas Scott to the Duke of Gloucester. By 1939, Hartnell had a workforce 400 strong and was making around 2,000 pieces a year. The by now Queen Elizabeth would come to number 26 to view Hartnell's collections, and later her daughters Elizabeth and Margaret would do the same. This is just a tiny snapshot of the man who helped establish British couture as a force to be reckoned with, and who created 2 dresses for a queen that defined moments in British history. We'll see both these monumental gowns in the gallery today. To use a suitably British phrase for these exemplars of British manufacture, they'll knock your socks off. And they both came from right here, 26 Bruton Street, the epicentre of British couture. In 1977, the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, Hartnell was invested by the Queen Mother as a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, and became, in the words of Prudence Glynn, fashion editor of the Times, quote, the first fashion knight. Glynn described Hartnell's work rather brilliantly as, quote, the Norman Conquest. Hartnell continued to act as an official supplier to the Queen until his death in 1979. His influence continued long after his passing. In fact, Princess Beatrice wore a dress designed for Elizabeth II by Hartnell for her wedding in 2020. Someone who had a deep admiration for Hartnell's work was none other than one Christian Dior. On the 12th of February 1947, at 30 Avenue Montaigne in Paris, Christian Dior presented his first collection, with voluptuous full skirts, cinched-in waists, rounded shoulders. The collection Corot, meaning flower-shaped, and Ennui, figure of 8, caused an immediate sensation, in their stark contrast to the structured, utilitarian, boxy fabric-conserving shapes of the wartime years of the early 1940s. "My dear Christian," exclaimed editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar Carmel Snow, "your dresses have such a new look." And from that point onwards, this silhouette became so known. Despite backlash over the high fabric consumption necessary for the creation of these lines, the new look established Dior as a leader in Paris haute couture and reasserted the city's dominance in the fashion world. On April the 25th, 1950, Dior brought 80 of his couture designs for summer to the Savoy Hotel in London for a show known as the Dior Circus. Norman Hartnell, as chairman of the Incorporated Society of London Fashion Designers, was among the enraptured audience. In his autobiography, Hartnell proudly recalls Dior's praise of his work at this event. Quote, "Whenever I try to think of something particularly beautiful," said Monsieur Dior to the guests and journalists present, "I think always of those lovely dresses that Mr. Hartnell made for your beautiful queen when she visited Paris." In 1947, it was announced that Dior and Hartnell were to receive the Neiman Marcus Award for Contemporary Influence on Fashion, a quote, kind of dressmaker's Oscar. However, Hartnell wasn't able to travel to Dallas, Texas for the ceremony. Following another announcement of 1947 in England, Hartnell was to be far too busy designing a wedding dress for a very special bride. It is clear that Princess Elizabeth, who turned 21 in April 1947, admired Dior's new look, and Norman Hartnell created pieces for her in the Dior line. So let's head back to the gallery and see some incredibly fine examples from the wardrobe of a fashion-forward princess. These incredibly beautiful coats in ink blue, cherry red, teal blue and brown demonstrate the hallmarks of the new look silhouette: nipped-in waists, padded hips and full skirts. They are made of fine silk velvet and are just below knee length. As the exhibition book explains, quote, "There are ingenious and beautifully crafted elements, including notches in collars and sleeves, individually designed buttons, and a variety of collar shapes, some of which were designed to have fur embellishment that was later removed." It is likely that it was the princess herself that requested the darker colours, signalling to what the exhibition terms her fashion forwardness and her role patronising the couturiers who were stimulating the rise in the reputation of British haute couture. The 1940s saw Norman Hartnell firmly established as Princess Elizabeth's main couturier. Under the restrictions of rationing of the Second World War, Hartnell had altered some of his earlier pieces for Queen Elizabeth in order that they could be re-worn by the young princess. He also made utility clothing and service uniforms for the royal family. Hartnell had three signature styles: the day dress and coat, the mermaid line evening dress and jacket, and the crinoline evening gown. He altered and embellished these styles as appropriate for the heir to the throne, and it set her apart from the designs made for his other clients, who famously through time included Marlene Dietrich, Vivian Leigh, and Elizabeth Taylor. This photograph by John French of Barbara Golan was taken on the platform of Charing Cross Underground Station in 1954. In it, she's wearing Christian Dior's Ciné Noir black swan dress. This dress on display for the Princess Elizabeth by Hartnell is clearly based on the new look silhouette, but the combination of panels in both black silk satin and black silk velvet are reminiscent to Dior's Black Swan of 1949. The bodice has a quote deep décolleté of velvet with a slim panel of silk satin set inside the neckline. The side panels of silk satin and the front panel of velvet flow from a narrow waist to a padded hip to a full skirt.
Oh yes, I see. Yeah. I wonder why they don't
In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Princess Elizabeth was evidently fond of the strapless dress, and this rich burgundy silk velvet gown by Hardy Amis, King of Tailoring, is an extremely fine example. Look at the complexity of the folded fabric around the waistline, bodice, and skirt. All that work with silk and velvet. As the object card points out, the dress is not unlike one in rich burgundy velvet by Cristobal Balenciaga from 1949, demonstrating the interplay between Paris and London couture houses. The rich blue velvet and silk taffeta evening gown on display here is another fine example of evening wear by Norman Hartnell, dating from between 1948 and 1950. This gown has been designed and suitably tailored for Elizabeth, the expectant mother. It's very similar to dresses designed by Hartnell for the royal couple's official visit to Paris in 1948. The sleeves have been especially designed in order to easily affix the orders of the Scarlet Legion d'Honneur. When she was 18 in 1945, Princess Elizabeth joined more than 200,000 women serving in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, becoming the only female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces during wartime. The princess was issued with the standard uniform battle dress, consisting of jacket, trousers, shirt, belt, and forage cap. A leather jerkin, extra shirts and ties also survive in the royal collection. Princess Elizabeth was a fully qualified driver and a junior commander by the end of the war. At the time, it was thought that the uniform of the ATS was not as appealing to young women as that of the Wrens or the RAF. In 1949, when the ATS was succeeded by the Women's Royal Army Corps, members of the Incorporated Society of London Fashion Designers were asked to submit anonymous designs to the King. Hartnell's design was chosen for the new uniform. From the age of 11, Princess Elizabeth had been a Girl Guide, and when she was 16, she was enrolled as a Sea Ranger. This group were senior Girl Guides with a naval interest who contributed to the war effort. Princess Elizabeth was made a Commodore, and her uniform was supplied by Miss Avis Ford, who had previously worked for the court dressmaker Madame Henley Seymour. Miss Ford had been encouraged by Queen Mary to work as an independent dressmaker. The navy blue wool flannel jacket and skirt are cut in a fashionable 1940s silhouette, but it was made using a minimal amount of fabric under the restrictions of rationing imposed by the Board of Trade and in line with the necessities of utility clothing. The matching wool hat here was made by Henry Heath of Oxford Street. The utility jacket and skirt, which appears in one of my favourite photographs of Princess Elizabeth, is representative of the utility style with its, quote, rough wool fabric, economical cut and simple buttons, and is thought to be by Miss Ford. During the war, British couturiers, sponsored by the Board of Trade, produced designs for utility clothing that could be copied by wholesale manufacturers, with the aim of demonstrating that, quote, creativity was possible within the constraints of the austerity regulations of rationing. The military and equestrian tailor Bernard Witherill was Queen Elizabeth's official supplier for 70 years. He made this tailored tunic, known as a jumper, for Princess Elizabeth in 1947 to wear at Trooping of the Colour in her role as Colonel in the Grenadier Guards, and it was worn at this occasion each year until 1950. The tunic was worn with a side saddle skirt and a specially designed regimental forage cap. This cap was made by milliner Arj Tharup, who would later make the tricorn hat Elizabeth would wear as sovereign at Trooping of the Colour from 1952 onwards. Draped in a Grecian style across the body and accompanied by a matching headdress, This dark green fine silk robe is by Ede and Ravenscroft and was specially created in 1946 when Princess Elizabeth was initiated into the mystic circle of bards at National Ystrfurt held in Mountain Ash, Glamorgan, Wales. In this ancient ritual, the princess became an honorary bard known as Elizabeth o' Windsor, and she retained this name for 60 years. Don't you worry, millinery enthusiasts, this is not the only hat you will see in this exhibition, but it is the only surviving hat of milliner Kate Day. This is a calotte-style hat which Princess Elizabeth liked a lot during the 1940s and into the 50s. Its brimless crown suited her hairstyle. This hat is made of ermine tails which have been stitched to stiff net to add structure. The linen, cotton and wool white suit in the middle of the velvet coats is also by Norman Hartnell and was made for Princess Elizabeth to wear on board the HMS Vanguard. This was the vessel which the royal family travelled on for their tour of South Africa in 1947. This jacket is adorned with gilt metal naval buttons embossed with an anchor. The collar is stitched down onto the main fabric of the suit, and the slim-fitting skirt has been pleated at the front for comfort, whilst also helping to maintain an elegant line, aided also by the boning of the waistband. The impeccably crafted ensemble is one of only a handful of pieces to survive from this historic tour, which marked the first time a monarch had ever visited South Africa. During the tour of South Africa, Queen Elizabeth and her daughters wore ostrich feathers in their hats in recognition of the country's most valuable exports. On the occasion of her wedding in November the same year, Princess Elizabeth was presented with 2 ostrich feather capes by the farmers of South Africa. Here are 2 exceptional items of evening wear from Princess Elizabeth's early teenage years. Both demonstrate the exquisite craftsmanship and design that was making British couture a force on the world stage and made, quote, Britain an internationally recognised centre of fashion to rival that of Paris. Clothes rationing was enforced in England between 1941 and 49, and it is known that during this time some of Queen Elizabeth's dresses were altered for her daughter to wear. These items of evening wear predate the onset of clothes rationing. Sadly, the maker of the cape is unknown. It is lined in quilted silk satin and has a velvet and silk satin hood. It would have been worn over an evening dress. Perhaps one like that of this example by Norman Hartnell, which has a scalloped hem and a sweetheart neckline. Over the top of the silk is lace which displays the national emblems of England, Scotland and Wales. Very fitting for an heir presumptive to the throne, and an early example of how Queen Elizabeth's clothes often contain details that were diplomatic and symbolic. Here the lace has been re-embroidered with gold thread, sequins and crystals. This gown by Norman Hartnell was chosen by the princess to wear in a new portrait by Yusuf Karsh in October 1951. It features the complex embroidered embellishments of which Hartnell was a master. A lot more Hartnell sparkle is coming up later on in the Glamour of Monarchy gallery. This cream Duchess satin gown has a pleated fichu collar, which was asymmetrically fixed to the bodice and later removed and reattached to form wide straps. Gold sequins, pearls and crystals on the bodice and the skirt form trailing embroidered motifs that are particularly bold and striking. "I despise simplicity," said Norman Hartnell. "It is the negation of all that is beautiful." I quite agree. Instantly recognisable as the work of Julie Lynn Charlotte of New York, this full-circle wool and felt skirt was made for Princess Elizabeth to wear on her and the Duke's tour of Canada in 1951. On their second night in Ottawa, the royal couple attended a private party hosted by the Governor-General Viscount Alexander, and they were captured on camera square dancing. The skirt, especially created, captures the carefree youth culture of the 1950s. The most popular of Lynn's skirts, which she adorned with felt from her mother's factory, were those with applied poodles, and thus these types of designs became known generically as poodle skirts. Princess Elizabeth's Lynn skirt features the figures of Romeo and Juliet amongst trailing roses. Just how charming is that, especially since Elizabeth and Philip were about to celebrate 4 years of marriage. Speaking of marriage, there's something incredibly precious up ahead. It has us all captivated, and it may well be the last time any of us get to see it. It is enough to note that the occasion demanded a poet, and that Mr. Hartnell has not failed to string his lyre with art and to ring in tune. So wrote a keeper at the Victoria and Albert Museum in an article of 1947 about Queen Elizabeth's wedding dress by Norman Hartnell. On July the 9th, 1947, the engagement of Princess Elizabeth and Philip Mountbatten was announced by Buckingham Palace. Norman Hartnell, with experience of crafting gowns for great occasions, submitted 11 wedding dress designs to the princess. In mid-August, one was approved. The royal wedding was to take place at Westminster Abbey on the 20th of November, so London's leading couturier had less than 3 months to create a hugely significant gown. In 1947, strict austerity measures were still in place in Britain following the war, and the royal family were subject to the same restrictions as the public. The princess had been saving her own ration coupons for her dress, and the British government granted her an extra 200 coupons specifically for this momentous national occasion. Apparently, many people across the UK sent their own closed coupons to the princess to try and help. But as it was illegal to transfer or use someone else's coupons, the donations were returned to the senders with a thank you note. Because of rationing, Hartnell had problems sourcing the 10,000 seed pearls he needed for his characteristically complex and extravagant embroidery. These ended up being imported from America. Hartnell's inspiration was Sandro Botticelli's Primavera, or Spring. Wishing to draw on the painting's sense of love, peace, and prosperity, he hoped his dress would be a symbol of hope for the future after the horrific impact of the war. The design included the embroidered symbols of, quote, ears of wheat for prosperity, garlands of York roses, star flowers, jasmine, and orange blossom, all, quote, proportioned like a florist bouquet, out of seed pearls, silver thread, sparkling crystal, and transparent applique tulle embroidery. Also on display are 2 specially made samples of the embroidery and a presentation letter from Norman Hartnell. These were sent to Queen Mary, Princess Elizabeth's grandmother. It was imperative that the dress only be made of material sourced in Britain or from her wartime allies. The Duchess satin was ordered from the Scottish firm Winter Silks Limited of Dunfermline, who used Chinese silkworms. Princess Elizabeth requested that the silk for her train be produced by Lady Hart Dyke of Lullingstone Castle in Kent and woven by Warner and Sons of Essex. Both these British manufacturers would later provide the materials for Queen Elizabeth's Coronation Gown, which we will see later on for ourselves. The dress is cut in the fashionable princess line with a fitted bodice, long sleeves, heart-shaped neckline, and a low V-pointed waist. The forecourt train is 13 foot long and is of silk tulle. It's attached to the dress at the shoulders, and it is embroidered in pearl, crystal, and applique Duchess satin. The veil of silk tulle is also embroidered. Norman Hartnell kept a record entitled Logbook, the Diary of the Dress, in which he details the production of this incredibly important gown, which would be photographed and filmed the world over. The press and the public were incredibly excited for and fascinated by the wedding of their future queen, and were desperate to know some of the details. Hartnell, however, was very committed to keeping the details of the wedding dress a secret. He whitewashed and curtained with muslin the windows of his workrooms to stop people sneaking a peek or cameras snapping a photo to leak. His manager slept at the Couture house for security reasons, and he made sure a friend was installed in the flat over the road on level with his showroom. Buckingham Palace had permitted a few details to be released, but in the end Hartnell's dress remained a secret until the wedding day. The princess's wedding dress was admired the world over and was instantly copied in the dresses of other brides of the late 1940s. It earned Hartnell much acclaim and catapulted his career from prestigious British couturier to an internationally respected designer. Did I mention that in the 3 short months he had to create this historically significant sensation, he also dressed 5 members of the royal family, the maids of honour, 8 bridesmaids, and made Princess Elizabeth's trousseau. Following the wedding, the dress was put on display in St James's Palace alongside more than 2,500 wedding gifts presented to the royal couple. The gown then embarked on a tour across the United Kingdom. In 2007, it was displayed in Buckingham Palace to mark the diamond wedding anniversary of the Queen and Prince Philip, and then shown again to celebrate the Queen's 90th birthday in the Fashioning a Reign exhibition at the Palace. Now it stands here to mark what would have been the Queen's 100th year, and this may well be the last time it is shown. At the time of its creation, it was common practice to, quote, treat satin with tin salts to improve the weight and drape of the fabric. This has caused the fabric to become brittle and shatter. The Royal Collection Trust's textile conservator, Cecilia Oliver, has revealed that the 79-year-old dress is, quote, breaking down at an epic rate. The delicate silk satin of the wedding dress has been well cared for and conserved through the years, and the most advanced techniques in preservation are being deployed to slow down the decay. Displaying such a fragile dress on a mannequin in an exhibition adds significant stress to the fabric, especially when you consider the weight of 10,000 pearls. The dress of such historical significance, however, even if no longer able to be exhibited, will be stored with care to preserve its legacy. The Queen's wedding shoes were made by Edward Raine, who supplied shoes to big couture houses such as Dior, Lanvin and Molyneux. They are made to a design specified by Hartnell and use the same ivory Duchess satin as the wedding dress itself. They are trimmed in silver and have seed pearl buckles. I love the bespoke silk satin padded and monogrammed box which they are still stored in today. Up until now, the exhibition had been incredibly quiet, but in this gallery it was great to hear people exclaim how they remembered the Queen wearing many of these ensembles, and I bet you at home will do the exact same thing. This section, entitled Tailoring and Daywear, Style and Function, revolves around this central display of 36 of the Queen's suits which were worn during public appearances throughout her reign. As you can see, we have ensembles in every colour of the rainbow. Colour was one of the most important factors to be carefully considered when choosing daywear for the Queen. Brighter colours were preferred to enable Her Majesty to stand out in large crowds. But there were other requirements too. The outfit had to be comfortable, the fabric appropriate for the occasion, location and weather. This fabric shouldn't make unnecessary noise either, and any added adornment or embellishment such as pockets, collars and fastenings should not spoil the line. Above all, it was the tailoring, the fabric and the cut that made an outfit successful. Britain is known for its tailoring excellence. In the late 19th century, the drapers Redfern and Sons, then of Cowes on the Isle of Wight, dressed the daughters and granddaughters of Queen Victoria, and later they dressed Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary. The couture fashion houses that were established in the 1920s had dedicated tailoring workrooms run by a head tailor, who in many cases went on to establish his own house. During the 1940s and early 1950s, the tailored day dress and jacket and the tailored coat were favoured by the young Princess Elizabeth for public appearances. She then started to wear skirt suits. It was from the 1960s that the day dress and matching or coordinating coat in the same length as the hem of the dress began to appear in Queen Elizabeth's wardrobe. This core combination remained a constant throughout the decades, but the fabric cut, line and hem length would always change in accordance to the fashion of the day. These ensembles were worn on multiple occasions, in many cases over several decades, so they were altered and amended appropriately. It is interesting to see in Norman Hartnell's peach tailored day dress and coat from 1960 that the hem of the dress has been unpicked, ready for alteration. Of course, no outfit was complete without a hat, and alongside the suits we'll see a few coordinating examples, but there are many more to be seen elsewhere in this section of the exhibition. The Queen would choose her shoes and handbag herself, and then choose gloves and jewellery as the finishing touches. From the 1940s through to the 1970s, the House of Hartnell and Hardy Amis created the vast majority of tailoring and daywear for the Queen. Then, after leaving Hartnell to set up his own firm, John Driscoll provided many ensembles until his death in 1964. From the late 1970s, Ian Thomas's designs came to dominate before John Anderson, Carl Ludwig von Rees and Maureen Rose featured heavily in the Queen's Day wardrobe in the 1980s and into the 90s. Predominantly, it was Stuart Parvin and Angela Kelly who dressed the Queen in her later years. Keep your eyes peeled as we take in all these ensembles for a dress coat and hat worn in Ireland as part of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee tour. Angela Kelly was inspired by Wedgwood jasperware found in the Royal Collection for this Wedgwood blue wool crepe and silk ensemble. It's simply beautiful. Just as Hartnell excelled in embellishments, Hardy Amis triumphed in tailoring. Many of the staff in his specialist tailoring workrooms had worked for and been trained in Paris couture houses, such as Worth, Vionnet, Lanvin and Dior. As a result, an Amis ensemble could be relied upon for impeccable tailoring, exceptional elegance, and incredible craft. Amis had worked for the London couturier Le Chasse. He worked under Digby Morton here, and he produced, quote, innovative and influential designs. For example, lowering the waistline of tailored jackets, which proved more feminine and flattering, and his designs became highly regarded in the fashion press. He was managing director of Le Chasse by the time he was 25 and succeeded Digby Morton as the designer of the house's whole collection. In 1941, he joined the House of Worth. At the outbreak of war, Amis joined the army, and due to his ability to speak several languages, worked in the intelligence corps, but continued to design part-time. He transferred to the SOE, Special Operations Executive, and had an incredible war career as a spy. Apparently, he used terms associated with fashion accessories as code words. He had his uniform tailored on Savile Row, and he got in a spot of bother for taking Vogue's war photographer, Lee Miller, to set up a photo shoot in Belgium after D-Day. Following the war in late 1945, one of his former clients at Le Chasse financed his move to Savile Row, and he opened his first couture house, Hardy Amis Limited, at number 14. Amis had immediate success amongst a clientele who had been deprived of couture during the war years, but his first royal commission came in 1951, when he was asked to supply the clothes for the tour of Canada. During the 40s and 50s, Amis had perfected his princess line cut. In this, there's no seams at the waist, they instead flow from the shoulder to the bottom of the skirt. The princess line, using colour to the best advantage and deploying rich, sumptuous fabrics, made his first tour collection a total triumph, and he was then asked by the palace to supply pieces for the Commonwealth tour of 1952. He was also commissioned for tours and occasions following Her Majesty's accession to the throne. By 1955, he had a royal warrant, and he was one of only 3 couturiers to be made dressmaker by appointment to the Queen during her reign. He was also personally recognised by the Queen for his commitment to British fashion, when he was awarded a personal gift of the sovereign in the form of the Commander of the Royal Victorian Order in 1977, followed by a knighthood in 1989. Through their length, cut, and overall colour or print, it is possible to place these ensembles in terms of date without even looking at the object card. For example, in the ensembles from the 60s, we see lengths shorten, a nod to the rising hemlines of the day, but not shockingly so. We also, interestingly, see psychedelic prints and exaggerated collars. We see the fashionable brown and orange hues of the 1970s in block and in printed fabrics, as well as the neons of the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. To this end, this wasn't just an impeccable display of the Queen's impeccable suits. It was a walk through the history of British tailoring, and I enjoyed more than one revolution around the room, witnessing for myself fashion's evolution. If you remember a particular ensemble of the Queen's that isn't on display here, perhaps one from a special royal occasion such as a wedding or Jubilee balcony appearance, or even one from an Olympic opening ceremony, then you'll probably want to hold on to your hats. The exhibition's final room that's coming up soon is full of the clothes that have adorned our national story during the Elizabethan age. You didn't think we'd come to an exhibition on Queen Elizabeth II's style and not see some jewels, did you? I love that the majority of items the royal collection have chosen to display were gifts to our late Queen, both in the form of official jewels given from other countries and personal pieces from her family given to mark important milestones or special occasions. There's a sapphire and diamond bracelet by Cartier given to her by her parents for her 18th birthday, a bracelet made by Boucheron to a design thought up by Prince Philip to mark their 5th wedding anniversary, a maple leaf Asprey brooch given by her father before her first tour of Canada, and the flower basket brooch given by her parents and worn in a Cecil Beaton portrait to mark the birth of Prince Charles. There's also the regimental brooch of the Grenadier Guards given to mark her 16th birthday when she was appointed as their colonel. Also on display is the wattle brooch given by the government and people of Australia to mark her first visit in 1954, and a silver fern presented on behalf of the women of Auckland. During the daytime, it was rare to see Queen Elizabeth out in public without her double or triple strands of pearls, earrings, and brooch. There are also tiaras, which, as they were commissioned by the Queen, reveal her own personal tastes. These tiaras included precious stones that were given by Brazil and Burma and were made by Garrard & Co. On the recent state visit to the US, Queen Camilla wore a Cartier Union Jack and Stars and Stripes brooch, which had been given to Queen Elizabeth on her first state visit to the US in 1957. Jewels, like clothes, are chosen deliberately on state occasions and often act as silent signifiers of diplomacy. Just look at this incredible display of the millinery of Majesty. No day ensemble worn by Queen Elizabeth II would have been complete without a hat, so it's unsurprising that there are several hundred examples by 10 different couture milliners that survive in the Royal Collection archive. The first couture milliner to work for the Queen was Tarup, who, quote, created some of the most important early hats that survive in the archive. He supplied hats to the Queen through the 50s to the 70s and was granted a royal warrant in 1961. Back in the fashion forward section, you may have noticed a calotte style hat. This is the only surviving example by Kate Day, who also had a royal warrant and supplied the Queen with hats when she was still a princess. In a letter to Day, the Queen once wrote, "It does make all the difference if one can feel confident about one's hats, and that, I can truthfully say, has always been the case with yours." Claude St-Cyr, who designed the hat with the roses the Queen wore for Princess Margaret's wedding, was a French couture milliner who opened a London house and by the 1950s served all the senior royal women. She designed millinery collections for Hartnell 2 times a year, and the Queen was particularly fond of her oblique hats, in which one side of the brim is angled to allow the crown to be decorated with trimmings. Another of the Queen's favourite milliners was Simone Merman, who supplied hats from the 1960s through to the 80s. Merman had worked for Elsa Schiaparelli in London from 1937 before opening her own salon. Many of Merman's designs for the Queen have small or no brims, ensuring Her Majesty's face could always be seen, and the decoration and embellishment were unusual and eye-catching to ensure that the Queen always stood out in a crowd. Frederick Fox supplied hats for 3 decades, and he often worked with Hardy Amis to design matching hats to ensembles. Ian Thomas also employed talented hat makers to design for his own millinery label. These included Valerie Lee, Marie O'Regan and Philip Somerville. In the early 2000s, the Queen wore hats of the Angela Kelly own label and those of Rachel Trevor Morgan. Most of the Queen's hats are carefully stitched inside the crown with a neatly cut fabric sample from the coordinating ensemble, ensuring that the Queen and her dresser could instantly recognise the correct hats to be worn with each outfit. But hats were often worn again with different ensembles. The hats were also stitched with a cross on the inner brim lining, marking the centre front to ensure it was worn correctly. The Queen also had beautifully and delicately crafted bespoke hat pins to ensure the hats stayed in place no matter the weather. The Queen's shoes came from couture designer Rain, Anello and David, Fabiola, Churches, who supplied brogues and walking shoes, Bective of Northampton, and John Lobb. The firm Rain also made handbags for the Queen in the, quote, distinctive and elegant top-handle style that the Queen wore over her arm and remained a constant in her wardrobe. The same style was later produced by Lorna of London, and the Queen also had examples by Asprey. She also had bags for evening use in a wide variety of styles, including gold, silver and black purse styles with chain handles and embroidered clutch bags. Sadly, there isn't any explanation of what the Queen exactly carried in her handbags, so that will remain an eternal mystery, which is only right really. The contents of a lady's handbag should always be an enigma. Very sadly, the shoes that Queen Elizabeth wore to her coronation do not survive in the royal collection. They were made by Roger Vivier, who had worked for H&M Rain. They sound spectacular, gold sandals made of kid leather, studded with rubies. Gloves were also a vital part of the Queen's wardrobe. As is the case with belts and bags, gloves were often made by smaller British makers for the larger couture houses. Cornelia James was a prolific supplier to the Queen.
It really tickles my
Within this part of the gallery are 2 tiny rooms behind glass, where we'll find 2 ensembles that were worn to huge historic occasions. On the 5th of May 1960, Queen Elizabeth's younger sister, Princess Margaret, married Anthony Armstrong Jones at Westminster Abbey. For this special occasion, the Queen wore this day dress and bolero in wondrous kingfisher blue by Norman Hartnell. Hartnell had been commissioned to create Princess Margaret's wedding dress, as well as the outfits for all the principal female members of the royal family. The Queen's ensemble features a, quote, fitted bodice and full crinoline skirt, which echoed the line of the wedding dress itself. The bodice is made of lace placed onto silk and silk tulle, as is the bolero jacket, and the same guipure lace, dyed to match the blue silk veil of the skirt, is cut and placed across the hips and all the way down the back of the skirt. The long matching gloves are of blue moire silk, and the Queen wore one of 2 hats designed for the occasion for her by Claude St. Cyr. The chosen hat is formed of 3 large blue silk roses trimmed with black velvet bows and blue net. It is thought that the Queen chose this one of Cyr's designs in tribute to her sister, her full name being Margaret Rose. This wedding marked the last time that floor-length daywear would be worn to a royal wedding. It is Cecil Beaton's photograph of the Queen in this elegant ensemble that the gallery have used on their poster. Stepping up to the glass window into this little room revealed a sumptuous Hardy Amis evening gown loaded with historical significance. It was worn to a state banquet at the White House held by President Dwight Eisenhower on the 17th of October 1957. This was during Queen Elizabeth's first official visit to the United States. The dress is of a dove grey Duchess satin and displays tailoring that is distinctively Amis. The full sweeping skirt has wide pleats and the corseted bodice a pleated and folded collar. It has been embroidered with pearls, crystals and gold thread, and Amis designed a stole embroidered in the same way to match. This staggeringly beautiful dress was worn with some staggeringly significant jewels. The Order of the Garter and the family orders of King George V and King George VI. The earrings from the mid-19th century had belonged to the Duchess of Gloucester, and the necklace, the Golden Jubilee of Carrington and Co., was originally presented to Queen Victoria. Just look how even behind glass the embellishment is making the dress twinkle and the jewels sparkle. This is a kind of magic only monarchy or dressing can conjure. On the wall behind this wonder is an enlargement of Hardy Amis's original design sketch. In this small space in between 2 larger galleries, displayed rather wonderfully, are outfits that I would describe as quintessentially British. We're talking tweeds, wools, waterproofs, the wardrobe of a lady of the great British countryside. On display are ready-to-wear pieces and practical couture tailoring, which the Queen wore when she was off duty. Both these wool tweed suits are from the 1960s, and they're by John Driscoll, who had worked as head of tailoring for Norman Hartnell before he started his own business and became tailor by appointment to the Queen. These suits were worn at Windsor Castle or Balmoral. She also wore this more unusual suit of matching waistcoat and skirt by Driscoll to more informal occasions such as polo matches. This tweed and fur-lined coat is a Norman Hartnell from the 1950s, and it's been displayed with durable, warm wool trousers. This dark green Loden coat is by Angela Kelly from 2000. It has a pale yellow silky lining beneath the Loden, a thick woolen yet waterproof material. It was specially designed to offer warmth and comfort. The Queen often wore it whilst walking her dogs, and it also appeared in the special photograph of 2022 in which she stood in between 2 of her beautiful fell ponies. An accessory that the Queen was known for was the silk headscarf, and she had some amazing designs, many of which celebrated her jubilees, and there's one with scenes from Trooping the Colour. Scarves were provided by Hermes, Burberry, Oliver Messel and Jacquemart. Jacquemart designed a scarf depicting polo players, which was inspired by how great Prince Philip was at the sport. This wonderful ensemble is Hartnell from the late 1940s to the early 1950s, and it's said that it was influenced by the Dior bar suit of 1947. The jacket is Harris tweed, and the kilt-like skirt is made in Balmoral tartan. It's believed that the special tartan, only allowed to be worn by members of the royal family, was thought up by Prince Albert in 1853 for Queen Victoria. Prince Albert's tartan is woven by Kinloch Anderson, Scotland's leading kilt makers and custodians of the royal tartans. This dark yellow wool fur-lined 3/4 length coat is another Norman Hartnell. It is not unlike a yellow woolen coat belonging to George VI that was found in the royal collection with a note attached in Queen Elizabeth's own hand, advising that it be kept for, quote, sentimental reasons. As we know, the Queen was passionate about horses, and a great deal of the Queen's equestrian wardrobe was provided by the specialist equestrian and military tailor Bernard Witherill. You can see the incredible craft in these jodhpurs and jacket, which have been made to ensure practicality and comfort, with an eye on style. The little riding cape is by Burberry, who supplied rainwear to the Queen from the 1950s and also had the important role of looking after and repairing the Queen's outerwear. The Queen's riding boots, always carefully stored with their bespoke lasts to ensure they could be worn for many years, were made by Maxwell of London and by Schneider, equestrian bootmakers to the household cavalry. In this unassuming little nook is displayed a suede jacket by Simpson of Piccadilly from 1962. The Queen must have liked it a lot, as, like much of her ready-to-wear and off-duty wardrobes, it shows signs of wear. The war skirt is by Dax. Both firms, which provided ready-to-wear pieces to the Queen, received royal warrants. In this other little alcove is something I was so hoping to see, one of the Queen's plastic see-through raincoats by Hardy Amis from the 1960s. These, worn on more formal official occasions, allowed the Queen's outfit beneath to show through on days when the British weather could not be relied upon. She also used Fulton's clear PVC birdcage umbrellas with a suitably coloured trim, which still allowed her to be visible to gathered crowds even if it was raining. As Amy Delahaye has noted in her excellent chapter in the accompanying exhibition book, quote, "It is perhaps Queen Elizabeth II's distinctive country and sporting event style that has been most widely emulated. This look became an intrinsic part of the nation's fashion identity." Delahaye notes how, quote, "Britain was the first country in the Western world to industrialise and therefore to romanticise the rural environment as an idyll, an ideal that has fed into British fashion identity ever since." I highly recommend a read of Delahaye's chapter, A Barometer for British Fashion, as it looks in detail at British manufacture and heritage names of the British fashion industry, which were patronised by the Queen throughout her reign. Now discard your comfies and your trusty old brogues and put on your ball gowns and your jewels, because we're off to a royal ball. Queen Elizabeth II was the most travelled sovereign in British history, and during her reign she undertook tours of the Commonwealth and other countries at the request of her government in order to strengthen economic, political and cultural relations. What the Queen wore on tour was of great importance. Outfits had to not only consider different climates, but also diplomacy and cultural sensitivity. Thus, when pulling together a tour wardrobe, designers would start by researching the countries the Queen would be visiting. They then had to produce a great amount of clothing, as each day of the tour could involve 3 or 4 outfit changes in line with the engagements planned. These tours generated a great deal of public interest, and the Queen was followed by media from around the world. British fashion, therefore, was presented on a global stage. In January 1952, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip embarked on a tour of Australia and New Zealand on behalf of the King, who was in ill health. Just 7 days in, whilst travelling through Kenya, Elizabeth received the news that her father, George VI, had died, and that she was to be proclaimed Queen in absentia at St James's. This dress by Norman Hartnell is a rare survival from this very tour. As the Queen immediately flew back to England, the dress did not have a chance to be worn. But it was, however, worn 4 years later in Nigeria and on a further tour. Many clothes from tours were reused, and for this reason, very few examples survive in the royal collection. The volume of sketches on display are by Norman Hartnell of the designs he produced for this 1952 tour. He presented this album of his creations to the Queen, who kept it privately for her entire life. Following the coronation, Queen Elizabeth and her husband embarked on their longest ever tour. An estimated 8 tons of luggage accompanied them through the West Indies, Australasia, Asia and Africa between November 1953 and May 1954. In excess of 100 ensembles were loaded into trunks for their 6-month tour, many of which were made by Norman Hartnell and complemented by Hardy Amis. Many of the Queen's shoes were supplied by H&M Rain, who also prepared the Queen a presentation album of her tour footwear. The Queen always took the lead with the preparations for her tour wardrobes. You'll see her own handwriting on designers' sketches, and a log for posterity was kept of what outfits were worn when and to what occasion. For the most part, daywear from the tours doesn't survive in the collection as much as the evening wear, purely because it was repeatedly reworn, both on other tours and whilst back at home. On display are ensembles for the Queen's tour of India, Pakistan and Nepal of 1961. Here Hartnell and Amis both supplied outfits appropriate for several different climates and which also contained cultural references, such as the swirling patterns on this stunner. Re-embroidered in gold thread, pearls, crystals and diamantes, Hartnell sought to invoke the intricate patterns of Zardozi, a traditional Indian embroidery technique. He also included India's national flower, the lotus. For this tour, Hartnell and Amis were both inspired by India and Pakistan themselves, the rich colours of dress, the architecture and the natural landscapes. Both couturiers worked with a range of styles and silhouettes, as the sketches and the surviving examples show. This heavily beaded evening gown, for example, is a new close-fitting silhouette which Hartnell began to produce for the Queen in the 60s, whereas his white and emerald green creation, which mirrors the colours of the flag of Pakistan, is plainer but with a dramatic waterfall pleat. Amis's creations for the tour were, as ever, a triumph in tailoring. This pale primrose yellow silk satin evening gown has a bodice that's swathed with a band of pleated fabric that meets at the back and from which falls a flat train. Embroidery takes the form of flowers and scrolls on the bodice, the hem of the skirt, and the tail of the floor-length train. Amis's wonderful golden silk damask dress and matching coat is oh so 60s. The voluminous A-line coat has a wide collar and 3/4 length sleeves, and the dress is closely fitted over the bodice, with a distinctive fold-over deep V at the back, which ends in a bow. Both dress and coat have the same gold and silver geometric foliate pattern. The rich colour is in keeping with the colours we know the Queen wore during the days of this tour. Hartnell used white crystal beads to form the peacock feather-inspired pattern on this exceptional blue silk veil dress in his signature crinoline silhouette. Each individual feather has been highlighted by diamantes in a filigree design. The Queen did not only wear couture on the royal tours. Whilst preparations were being made for the 1952 Commonwealth tour, the director of Horrocks' fashions, Kathleen Molyneux, the sister of the couturier Edward Molyneux, wrote to Queen Elizabeth and asked if she would like some of their dresses for the royal tour. Horrocks made cotton dresses, often with artist-designed prints. Keen to patronise another British company, the Queen placed an order not only for these 3 dresses, but for many more off the peg from Horrocks consistently until the firm ceased in the 80s. Following her public appearances wearing the dresses, the designs were made available to retailers who sold them at a modest cost for other women to buy. This section teaches us that, quote, dressing in a precise and carefully considered way was at the heart of the Queen's approach to her clothing requirements and was always discussed with her couturiers. This was never more acutely on display than in the preparation of ensembles worn overseas, where minute consideration was given to religious and cultural conventions. Queen Elizabeth was the first female monarch to apply regional and national emblems and colours or other diplomatically significant motifs to her tour wardrobes. Her ensembles consistently paid subtle compliments to the visited nations, and there are some amazing examples of this respectful tradition of the Queen on display here. The thoughtfulness and imagination shown by the couturiers is just outstanding. They really were the best of British. For a tour of Canada, Amos designed an evening gown with embroidered apple blossom and mayflowers, the emblem of Nova Scotia. Hartnell's magnificent white and royal blue maple leaf dress of 1967 was his second that honoured the national emblem of Canada. As the first reigning monarch to visit Japan, Queen Elizabeth wore a silk chiffon Hartnell dress with draped sleeves like a kimono and embroidered cherry blossom in delicate pink chiffon and crystal beads. In 1986, the Queen also became the first reigning monarch to visit China. Ian Thomas designed her a dress called Pink Peonies, reflecting the country's reverence for the flower as a symbol of prosperity. You can tell Ian Thomas trained with Hartnell, can't you? Just look at the arrangement of those bugle beads and the crystals and sequins that make the flowers 3D. To a state dinner held at Dublin Castle in 2011, the Queen wore an Angela Kelly evening dress with a long sleeve bodice embellished with an all-over design of applied shamrocks and an embroidered diamante harp on the shoulder. Careful attention also had to be paid to cultural and religious conventions when visiting different countries with different faiths. For example, non-Catholic monarchs or heads of state are expected to wear black when in audience with the Pope at the Vatican. For her audience in 1961, Queen Elizabeth wore a long dress of black lace with a bell-shaped skirt and a silk tulle and lace mantilla to cover her head. On display are also outfits for trips to the Middle East that, while made in lighter fabrics, were designed to ensure the Queen's head, arms and legs were covered. Ian Thomas also incorporated a long coat and slippers made by a Malaysian firm to his ensemble for the Queen on her visit to the Sultan Mosque. The blue day dress jacket and belt by Hardy Amis is made of lightweight textured silk chiffon and has a matching turban-style hat. It was worn on a state visit to Saudi Arabia in 1979. Whilst on tour or during overseas visits, the Queen also often received gifts of locally made clothes or regional dress, which, quote, showcased indigenous design or production. Queen Elizabeth received this suede jacket with multicoloured decoration in local First Nations style whilst visiting Yellowknife in Canada. She wore it over her evening gown. Before we turn into our next section, the gallery have displayed examples of Queen Elizabeth's evening wear from the 1970s. During this decade, royal evening wear increasingly had a more relaxed silhouette. The fashions of the times were dominated by looser shapes, floaty and relaxed fabrics, and vibrant colours and patterns. We've examples by the three top dogs here, Amos, Hartnell and Thomas, which demonstrate the Queen adopting the styles of the 70s. She was still as fashion-forward as she had been as a princess in the 1940s, as Hartnell's purple outfit shows. This sleeveless purple number has culottes rather than a skirt, with twisted beaded decorations inspired by Cartier designs of the previous decade in amethyst and turquoise. When Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne, there hadn't been a female monarch since Queen Victoria. That's 4 generations and 51 years. It was necessary, therefore, that the new Queen of the 20th century have new ensembles for her military roles. The Queen was the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Sovereign of the Orders of Chivalry. She was also Colonel-in-Chief for many individual military regiments, and through time she came to hold more than 50 ranks and appointments. All these positions have a uniform, and new ensembles were required for all the ceremonial rituals and formalities the Queen would lead. The Queen turned to specialist military, naval and equestrian tailors, long-established robe makers, but also to couturiers and, as it turned out, to art college students. It was the equestrian and livery tailor, Bernard Witherill, who designed this full-dress military tunic for Queen Elizabeth's role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Grenadier Guards. The firm used Queen Victoria's uniform as a reference point. The tunic was cut away at the waist to allow the Queen to ride side saddle. She wore this military tunic in its variations for each regiment as appropriate, every June up until 1986 for Trooping the Colour, the official birthday parade of the Sovereign. It was truly amazing to see this tunic up close, along with the famous tricorn hat of Arthur Up, who described making the hat for this great historical occasion as, quote, the greatest compliment of his career. Royal robe makers Ede and Ravenscroft were commissioned by the Queen to create or amend the sovereign's mantles. But in 1960, several students of the Royal College of Art were asked to produce designs for the mantle for the Order of the British Empire. Fans of 1960s fashion and of sewing in London will be as fascinated as I was to learn that it was the design of Marion Fole that was chosen to be made up by Ede and Ravenscroft and worn by the Queen. Quote, the ensemble is unusual in that it combines a zipped tailored overdress with the mantle, which is attached as an integral piece. It's of rose pink silk satin and is lined in pearl grey silk. The left side of the mantle is applied with an embroidered representation of the Star of the Order as a sovereign's badge, centred by a gold medallion with crowned effigies of King George V and Queen Mary in a red enamelled circle inscribed with the motto, for God and the Empire. The next year, Marion Fole and fellow Royal College of Art student Sally Tuffin established their own label keenly focused on tailoring. In 1963, they opened their first shop at 1 Marlborough Court, just off Carnaby Street, where their ready-to-wear ensembles became a huge part of the aesthetic of the youthquake. Fole and Tuffin also designed the initial clothes of the doll the 60s loved to dress, Cindy, Britain's first major fashion doll. Just like the clothes of her sovereign, Cindy's clothing was all proudly made in England. The Queen wore Fole's mantle in a number of portraits throughout her reign, including in that commissioned by the National Portrait Gallery and painted by Pietro Annigoni. Behind the robe is the preliminary sketch for this portrait, which the Queen purchased for the Royal Collection in 2006. In 1953, the British Admiralty commissioned the naval and military tailor Geeves, then of Old Bond Street, and now of Savile Row as Geeves and Hawkes, to make a cloak of Lord High Admiral for the Queen. Often referred to as the boat cloak, it is of dark navy wool with a velvet collar. It has gilt metal buttons and a gilt metal fastening at the throat, formed by a chain fastened by two lion head bosses. The red cloak is by Ian Thomas. In 1986, he based his design on the cloak of a lifeguard officer. Queen Elizabeth was Colonel-in-Chief of this regiment. As you might be able to glimpse, there's something incredibly special and historic in the glass case, which I'm keeping from you for just a little longer whilst we take a look at the remaining ensembles in this penultimate section. As the longest reigning sovereign in British history, Queen Elizabeth celebrated her silver, golden, diamond and platinum jubilees, and of course she always had something special to wear, which always left a lasting impression during these special national celebrations. I have always loved Queen Elizabeth's pink ensemble from her silver jubilee in 1977. Everything about it is perfect. Hardy Amos was thrilled to see the ensemble of coat, dress and stole he had created for the Queen's tour of Canada being worn again to such an historic occasion. The Frederick Fox hat is an icon in its own right. Its bell-shaped flowers suspended from silk stalks, instantly recallable. It was a pleasure to see it, having always admired it in photographs of this great British occasion. Hardy Amos and Frederick Fox also took the reins in 2002 and created this ensemble and hat for the Queen's Golden Jubilee. This blue outfit was worn for the Thanksgiving service at St Paul's Cathedral. There's no more obvious a sign that Britain loved a Queen's Jubilee than the Diamond Jubilee River Pageant of 2012. Despite the miserable driving rain, the banks of the Thames along the course of a 1,000-strong flotilla of boats was crammed with throngs of people. On board the royal barge, the Spirit of Chartwell, the Queen wore this white boucle wool and silk organza ensemble and hat by Angela Kelly, which was trimmed with diamantes and feathers. The Queen stood waving, despite being open to the elements from the launch point of Cadogan Pier to Tower Bridge. The Platinum Jubilee of 2022 turned out to mark the Queen's last major public appearances. Only two designers were working for the Queen by this time, Angela Kelly and Stuart Parvin. This incredible ensemble in Wedgwood Blue Charmelaine wool is charmingly trimmed with pearls and diamantes. It was worn in the official Platinum Jubilee portrait and for the final balcony appearance the Queen would make at Buckingham Palace. Despite its elegance and beauty, the last outfit may have stirred in us sadness, but our final ensemble in this section definitely raised a smile. Angela Kelly did not only make a dress for the Queen to wear at the London Olympics of 2012, she also made one for the Queen's stunt double. Accompanied by Mr. Bond, Daniel Craig, with corgis playfully following along, the Queen left Buckingham Palace and stepped into a helicopter to travel to the Olympic Stadium and make a memorable entrance. The dress of the stunt double who actually made the jump features a zipped panel for the parachute harness. This is the first time both ensembles have been displayed together, serving to remind us of the great sense of character and fun the Queen had to partake with such style in such a momentous national occasion. Definitely one that will be etched into our memories for many, many years. What a legend! The Queen went above and beyond her duty. Within museums and galleries, I have seen a lot of dresses, but I have never seen a dress that's a transcendental treasure as this gown is. Norman Hartnell didn't just weave fabric and sew on diamantes when he and his incredibly talented team made this monumental masterpiece. He cast a spell. He made tangible the often unexplainable magic and myth behind the ancient concept of the crown. The Coronation Gown had to carry the history of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth within its very stitches. The symbolism and the significance of royalty had to coruscate from every faceted crystal, seed pearl and golden thread. Hartnell understood what this dress was destined to become. He had to create something that would live for centuries for a monarchy that had lived for even longer, and he had just 8 months to do it. In his autobiography entitled Silver and Gold, Norman Hartnell describes in detail the history of the coronation dress he designed. He explains how the first thing he wanted to do was look to history and tradition, and so visited the London Museum and the London Library to, quote, leaf through authoritative tomes, searching for information on the coronations of queens regnant of the past. He thought of, quote, altar clothes and sacred vestments and everything heavenly that might be embroidered upon a dress destined to be historic. He took himself off to his home in the Windsor Forest and came up with 8 designs to put to the Queen. Her Majesty appreciated elements of several of them, but to the proposed embroidery of the emblems of each of the countries that make up the United Kingdom, she insisted that there also be those of the dominions for which she was now Queen, making the total amount of national emblems to embroider 13. Hartnell approached the Garter King of Arms at the office of the Earl Marshal for his authority on the national emblems. He corrected Hartnell's sketch. The symbol of Wales wasn't, as Hartnell had drawn, a daffodil, but a leek. Hartnell wasn't too pleased, but he was able to, quote, transform the earthy leek into a vision of Cinderella charm and worthy of mingling with her sisters Rose and Mimosa in a brilliant royal assembly, and fit to embellish the dress of a queen. With this knowledge, and excited about the Queen's appreciation of the inclusion of colour, Hartnell set to work on his 9th sketch. As the exhibition book notes, quote, Hartnell's 1953 coronation dress was the ultimate expression of his skill as a designer, as well as being, with its exquisite construction and embellishment, the pinnacle of his couture house's exceptional craftsmanship. On the day of her coronation, Queen Elizabeth was quite literally wrapped in Bruton. The white Duchess satin of the gown was entirely homegrown. The raw silk was produced by Lady Zoe Hart-Dyke at Lullingstone Castle in Kent. Established in 1929, this was Britain's first silk farm, and it had been visited by Queen Mary to inspect the silk before it was used in the coronation of 1937. The hanks of raw silk were then sent to Warner & Sons of Braintree, Essex, to be turned into fabric. Warner & Sons had also hand-wove the purple velvet for the 5-metre-long robe of estate. Luxurious Duchess satin was used for its ability to hold its shape. The dramatic crinoline bell shape of the gown needed this support, for the embellishments and embroidery weighed 13 kilograms. The skirt, where the bulk of the embroidery can be found, is backed with cream taffeta and reinforced with horsehair and linen. Hartnell was designing for the very first televised coronation, and, being a master of his art, understood how to avoid his dress looking flat on black and white screens. To ensure the dress would shimmer and glow even at low resolution, a dizzying array of materials for the embellishments were incorporated. Gold and silver bullion thread for the raised work, seed and mother of pearl, crystal, amethyst, thousands of tiny diamantes, sequins and bugle beads. Here in 2026, under specially curated lighting, the coruscation aimed for by Hartnell and witnessed by over 27 million people worldwide at the time is still there. The magic still shimmers. Hartnell's final design was worked into a full presentation sketch, and samples of the 13 individual emblems were put together. These were shown to journalists the day before the coronation, and a special presentation sketch was made as a gift to the Queen. Both the Queen's sketch and the samples are on display here for us to see. In his autobiography, Hartnell details how he secretly embroidered an extra 4-leaf shamrock on the left side of the skirt, specially positioned so that the Queen's left hand would rest upon it during the ceremony. Most historians believe that on the day Her Majesty didn't even know it was there. It was a private omen for good fortune from Hartnell to his sovereign. The fan on display next to the dress is of ostrich feather and tortoiseshell and has Queen Elizabeth's cipher in diamonds. Following a long-established tradition, it was made by the Worshipful Company of Fan Makers following the designs and materials of fans given in the past to Queens Regnant and Consort. Hartnell's wonderful autobiography is brilliant if you wish to read further about the making of the coronation dress. It details the many talented hands who combined to transform Hartnell's vision into reality, who worked to produce this phenomenal gown, including the many embroideresses and seamstresses behind the scenes in his workrooms. Now, you don't call anyone that isn't a monarch Majesty, And from now on, I will never again call another dress majestic, because it is only this one that really and truly is. Every splendid occasion, a royal ball, a state banquet, needs a splendid dress, and here we find ourselves whirling around within the glamour of monarchy. The evening dresses on display in the exhibition's final section demonstrate the different silhouettes the Queen favoured through the decades of her reign. Through the 50s and the 60s, the crinoline skirted gown dominated, and there are many examples here for us to see. The crinoline first appeared in the 1850s during the reign of Queen Victoria and was popularised by the designs of the English-born Parisian couturier Charles Frederick Worth. Those of you who watched my video on the V&A's Marie Antoinette Style exhibition will remember the name Franz Xavier Winterhalter, who painted portraits of Eugenie, the wife of Napoleon III, wearing crinoline dresses invoking the aesthetic of Marie Antoinette's court. Winterhalter painted many such court portraits, and King George VI encouraged Norman Hartnell to take inspiration from the many Winterhalter paintings in the royal collection to create a romantic and feminine look for his consort, Queen Elizabeth. This look became one of Hartnell's signature styles, upon which the success of his couture house was built. The evening gowns we're looking at now are all from the 1950s and are all Norman Hartnell. As you can see, they feature beautiful embroidery and embellishment. Hartnell had an in-house embroidery studio, and his ability to combine rich fabrics with incredible embroidery rivaled anything that Parisian couture embroiderers such as Lesage could produce. Across the decades, there are very few pieces of evening wear that do not incorporate the sparkle of sequins and the glitter of beading, revealing that this was a design element the Queen expected. It was also appropriate for the significance of state occasions. An embellishment would complement the historic jewels and orders of insignia that would be worn in accordance to the nationality of visiting guests or the location of the visit. Duchess satin was used for its luster and its ability to hold its shape under the weight of embellishment. The embroidery on this example is in high relief, and a variety of techniques have been used to create the breathtaking final effect. One technique is known as tambour. A black and white painting on paper was sent to the embroideresses, who would then select the appropriate materials to stitch onto fabric. The original painting would then be drawn onto tracing paper and then pricked or pounced through the paper onto the back of the individual component pieces of fabric that would make up the dress. These were then embroidered on large tambour frames to keep the fabric straight. Solid glass jewels were also clamped, fixed to a claw and pushed through from the reverse of the fabric before being clamped in place. Different materials could be stitched on in different ways to create different effects. On this striking dress, bugle beads have been used for their ability to form borders and soft edges. This dress, worn in a portrait sitting prior to the Queen's first state visit to France, also incorporates multiple embroidery techniques. Gold work is a luxurious form of embroidery that creates intricate textured surface designs that shimmer. Rather than being stitched through the fabric, the metallic threads used in gold work are laid on top of the fabric and held in place with a secondary, finer thread. Gold work can be seen in the three-dimensional padded elements of this gown. Padding, when used underneath metallic threads to create relief, provides a shimmery, structured appearance. For me, the evening wear Hartnell produced for the Queen's first state visit to America in 1957 are amongst his most exceptional creations. This dress was worn at a dinner held in honor of President Eisenhower at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. The gown is trimmed with pleated silk chiffon and is applied all over with lace. The floral design has been heavily re-embroidered in pearls, sequins, and crystals. I love the shade of the soft apple green and the peplum of the corseted bodice. Underneath these exquisite encrusted gowns lay layers of silk lining as well as a crinoline underskirt, ensuring that they were not that uncomfortable to wear. There are, however, two dresses on display by Hartnell from the 50s that are not, as we've come to expect, encrusted with crystals. The first is from 1956 and was worn to the royal film performance of the Battle of the River Plate, where the Queen met Marilyn Monroe. This evening dress is unusual for Hartnell on two levels, the first being that it is silk velvet and devoid of embellishment, and the second being that it is black, a colour traditionally reserved for periods of mourning. As the object card for this unusual treasure notes, Hardy Amis once said that it would be, quote, surefire theatre to dress the Queen in black. He believed it would be the perfect foil upon which to showcase those historic and symbolic jewels. This dress from 1958 demonstrates Hartnell's ability to produce a spectacular evening gown without any sequins, lace, beads, or pearls. Quote, the cut and form with draped and folded velvet terminating in an exaggerated bow show the influence of the British-born couturier Charles James, who spent his entire career in North America. The gathered velvet and bow recalls James's coq noir of 1937, as well as his later pieces which combined velvet with silk crepe. This vivid blue velvet and purple shot silk Duchess satin gown was first worn on a state visit to the Netherlands. It may not have any embellishment, but it is certainly not lacking in drama. Spectacular, isn't it? Designers submitted their proposed ideas for the Queen's clothes in the form of sketches, and some of Hartnell's sketches are here for us to see alongside the finished products. The Queen would mark these with a yes or a no, and often added notes. For particularly important gowns, a sample of the embroidery of the actual fabric was supplied alongside the sketch. These sketches were drawn by the designers themselves or by specially trained sketch artists. They were often used as advertising by the specific couture house and were also, in the case of sketches for the Queen, supplied to the press by Buckingham Palace. This was done to ensure each designer was properly credited for their work and the details properly recorded for the public to read about. They are, as the gallery has pointed out, pieces of art in themselves. During the revolutionary years in fashion that were the 1960s, new styles of dress were reflected in the silhouettes of the evening wear worn by the Queen. Royal dress, said Hartnell wisely, must never be pedestrian. It requires a style outside the prevailing conventions of modishness. So, although we may see a change in silhouette with the change in decade, the gowns transcend fashion. This gown, worn during a tour of Italy in 1961, is one of Hartnell's earliest column or sheath dresses. To retain a sense of monarchical glamour, it is of course heavily beaded, but also features a modern interpretation of the court train which falls from the shoulders. The beaded silk tulle train ensures that the simpler dress still gives a suitably regal impression. The gold and silver embellishment form symbols of Italy, including oak leaves, as well as vermicelli and geometric designs. During the 60s, as well as adding modern interpretations of regal trains, Hartnell also reinterpreted 18th and 19th century shapes. He produced a modern fitted version of the sackback. Think the examples of robe l'anglais we saw at the V&A. He also produced this heavily embroidered peach number, an interpretation of the bustle dress. The bustle appeared as fashion was moving away from the crinoline in the late 19th century. Isn't that clever of Hartnell to bring back something at a time when the crinoline of the 50s was similarly phasing out? The bodice has a small peplum which, quote, delineates the shape of the skirt. The dress is flat at the front, but the padding at the back accentuates the dress's profile. The sheath shape of this dress from 1963 may look simple, but the encrusted embellishment is far from it. The embroidering of sequins worked in chevron and vermicelli designs onto silk chiffon, quote, required a high level of skill to ensure that the finished patterns were aligned. the bodice of this gown from 1966 is embroidered, so for Hartnell it's somewhat understated. The whole dress of silk chiffon is markedly more floaty and relaxed than the styles we've seen so far, but still retains its elegance, especially with the added feature of the train falling from the back in 2 panels. This very pretty dress was worn during the Queen's tour of the Caribbean. There are a few more examples of evening wear from the 60s left for us to see. I have a particular soft spot for this one from 1963, which was worn by the Queen on her second visit to New Zealand. With the same lozenge-shaped divisions in the embroidery design as the coronation dress, this gown feels more ceremonial than the other evening dresses on display. This was appropriate as it was worn when the Queen opened the third session of the 33rd Parliament in Wellington. Many of the Queen's evening gowns were made in ivory, shades of cream or off-white. This meant that they could be worn for state occasions such as the opening of Parliament or underneath mantles for other annual services. These dresses were also most effective at providing a foil for the different coloured sashes of the various orders of insignia, as well as for the parures of jewellery with coloured stones. In the case of this dress, the ivory Duchess satin really shows off the coloured jewelled embroidery. And just look at that back. As we've seen, other colours were also used for evening wear. This yellow Duchess satin dress is from right at the beginning of the 60s, and you can certainly tell. The colour, the simple clean cut, and those bows either side of the waist, a simpler design of the kind which the Queen wore for dinners and receptions on board the HMS Britannia. The colour of this gown from 1965 was deliberately chosen for a visit to Ethiopia, being both seen on the national flag and in the order with which the Queen was invested during the visit. It is made of supple silk starin fabric and has an integral train at the back. From the late 60s, the Queen's evening dresses began to feature an A-line silhouette. This style stayed with her in varying forms through the rest of her life. There are a couple of pieces here from the 1970s. We saw Hartnell's sketch for this dramatic silk velvet opera cloak earlier on. It is lined in gold lame and fastened by looped frogging at the throat. The stand-up collar has crystals, beads and diamantes. It's from 1975 and was designed for a tour of Mexico, but it was worn many times by the Queen. The dress underneath is from 1972. Hartnell made several dresses that had embroidery specially placed in order that it showed through when a cape or cloak was worn over the top. This approach can also be seen in this, our final evening gown. This is one of 4 made for the state visit to France in 1972. They were specially made to be worn with a coordinating evening coat. The embroidery is therefore concentrated around the lower part of the skirt and the neckline. Wasn't that a magnificent pageant of Hartnell's masterpieces? I really enjoyed how they were showcased here, with the drapes positioned to conceal the preceding gallery. It was as if we had been invited into a ballroom to observe a soiree held to celebrate the glory days of British haute couture. The Royal Collection holds the largest extant collection of Norman Hartnell's work, and it was a real thrill to see so many of his gowns together in this most special gallery. By ensuring they were kept in the collection, the Queen clearly understood that Hartnell's creations were exemplary and important. She must have viewed them, therefore, as significant in the story of British fashion. She donated a number to prominent institutions. The first Maple Leaf of Canada dress by Hartnell is touchingly part of the permanent collection at the Canadian Museum of History, and the famous Flowers of the Fields of France dress is to be found within the V&A. I wonder what Hartnell would think to learn that it wasn't just his coronation and wedding gowns for Queen Elizabeth that ended up in a museum, but practically the entire corpus of his career dressing the Queen. Long live the memory of the exceptional Sir Norman Hartnell. All that glitters is most definitely silver and gold. As we make our way out of the exhibition, we see a note on Queen Elizabeth's fashion legacy. It tells of how both directly and indirectly Queen Elizabeth influenced and inspired the creations of contemporary designers, including Karl Lagerfeld, Miuccia Prada, and Alessandro Michele. As we have learnt, the Queen did so much throughout her reign to support and promote British fashion. She continued to attend fashion shows showcasing British talent right up until her last years. There are also several pieces by designers which playfully invoke elements of her signature styles, including her off-duty Hermes scarves. Right before we leave the gallery, the final object in the display case is the green neon hat by Rachel Trevor Morgan, which the Queen wore for her 90th birthday balcony appearance. It matched her green neon ensemble and spread the hashtag neon at 90. It's a fitting note to end on if you look one more time to Hartnell. Black, he said, does not appear in the rainbow of hope. I headed downstairs to the gift shop where there was some very nice exhibition merch. I couldn't resist the bag, and obviously I highly recommend the exhibition book. You can pop into the shop even if you don't have a ticket for the exhibition, and there is also an official Buckingham Palace gift shop over the road from the gallery. Friends, I truly hope you enjoyed this special video on this wonderful exhibition. I look forward to hearing what you all thought, so please do leave me a comment. Thank you ever so much for watching. Until I see you all again really soon, take good care of yourselves. Loads of love from London, Queenie. Mwah. I'm royal waving.